It was a Tuesday when my whole life collapsed. A package arrived at my office with no return address, just my name written in handwriting I hadn't seen in months. Inside was a burner phone and a single video file. When I pressed play, my dead uncle's face filled the screen. "Ariel, if you're watching this, then they succeeded in silencing me. But I left you everything you need to destroy them. My name is Ariel McCarty and I'm 28 years old. I thought I had the perfect life. A marketing executive at a prestigious firm in downtown Chicago, engaged to the man of my dreams, living in a beautiful apartment my stepfather helped me afford. But that Tuesday afternoon, I learned that everything I believed was a carefully constructed lie designed to keep me compliant while they systematically destroyed my life. Before we continue, please like and subscribe. It really helps me keep telling these stories that need to be heard. Your support means everything to me. Uncle Tobias had died 6 months earlier in what everyone called a tragic hiking accident. The whole family mourned him at a beautiful service where Kingston gave a touching eulogy about losing his dear brother-in-law. But his voice on that phone was shaking with fear, not from any accident. "Check the safety deposit box," he whispered. "Key is taped under your childhood desk. Trust no one in the family, Ariel. No one. They've been planning this for years." I sat in my office cubicle, staring at the phone, my hands trembling. My co-workers were typing away, discussing their lunch plans, completely oblivious to the fact that my entire world was crumbling around me. I excused myself to the bathroom and watched the video 3 more times, memorizing every word, every expression on my uncle's face. "The woman you call your mother isn't who you think she is," his recorded voice continued. "Neither is the man who raised you. And Ariel, your fiancé didn't meet you by accident. None of this happened by accident." I drove straight to my mother's house, the sprawling colonial in Oak Park where I grew up after my father died when I was 12. Sloane was at her job at the art gallery, and my stepfather Kingston was supposedly traveling for business, so I had the house to myself. I walked through rooms that suddenly felt foreign, looking at family photos that now seemed like stage props. My old bedroom had been converted to an office after I moved out, but my childhood writing desk was still there. I got on my hands and knees and felt around under the ornate wooden surface. My fingers found it immediately, a small silver key taped to the wood, exactly where Uncle Tobias said it would be. The safety deposit box was at First National Bank, the same institution where my family had maintained accounts for over 30 years. The bank manager, Mrs. Rodriguez, knew me by name and smiled warmly as she led me to the vault. "Haven't seen you in a while, dear. How's the wedding planning going?" If only she knew. My hands shook as I turned the key in box 447. Inside were documents that made my blood run cold. Bank statements showing systematic withdrawals from my trust fund, the money my parents had left me when they died in that car accident when I was 12. Money I thought was still safely invested for my future, growing steadily until I turned 30. $850,000. Gone. But that was just the beginning of the nightmare. There were video files on multiple flash drives, each one labeled with dates going back 3 years. Hours of footage my uncle had secretly recorded at family gatherings, business meetings, phone calls made from hidden locations. I plugged the first drive into my laptop right there in the bank vault and watched Kingston, my stepfather who'd raised me like his own daughter, discussing my inheritance with cold, calculating precision. "The girl has no idea how much she's actually worth," he said into his phone, sitting in his home office. "The trust fund is just the tip of the iceberg. When her grandfather dies, and the doctors say it's only a matter of months, she'll inherit the entire estate. Over $4 million. My grandfather. He'd been sick, yes, but I had no idea he was dying. No one had told me. Once Braxton marries her, we'll have complete control," Kingston continued. "She trusts him completely. Always has been too emotional, too naive to see what's right in front of her face. Braxton. My fiancé of 2 years, the man I planned to marry in 3 months. The man I thought loved me unconditionally. I kept watching, feeling sicker with each revelation. There was my mother, Sloane, sitting across from Kingston in what appeared to be a restaurant booth, nodding along as he explained how they'd been managing my assets without my knowledge. She's always been naive about money, my own mother said, stabbing her salad with unnecessary force. Takes after her father that way. Too trusting, too willing to let other people handle the complicated stuff. It makes this almost too easy. The camera angle suggested Uncle Tobias had filmed this secretly, probably with a hidden device. How long had he been investigating my family? How long had he known what they were doing? The worst part came on the third flash drive. Security footage from what appeared to be Kingston's real estate office, showing Ophelia Thorne, my best friend since college, sitting across from Kingston's desk accepting an envelope thick with cash. My maid of honor. The woman who'd held my hand through every heartbreak, every triumph, every major decision of my adult life. Just keep reporting on her activities, Kingston instructed, his voice clear on the recording. Any new relationships, job changes, changes in her routine, anything that might affect our timeline. We're too close now to let anything derail the plan. What about Braxton? Ophelia asked, tucking the envelope into her purse without counting it. He's getting nervous about the timeline. Says she's starting to ask questions about their finances. Braxton needs to keep her distracted and happy until the wedding. After that, it won't matter what she suspects. My best friend. Being paid to spy on me for months, maybe years. I sat in that cold bank vault for over 3 hours, reading document after document, watching video after video. My parents' life insurance money, supposed to be in a protected trust until I turned 30, had been transferred to accounts controlled by Kingston through a series of legal maneuvers I didn't understand. Properties I thought the family owned together, including the lakeside house where we spent every summer, were actually purchased with my inheritance money, but Kingston had been collecting all the rental income from the investment properties for years. But Uncle Tobias hadn't just collected evidence of their financial theft. He'd discovered something much darker, more systematic. A business called Meridian Solutions, supposedly a consulting firm that helped wealthy families manage their estates. In reality, it was a front for money laundering, and my stolen inheritance was being funneled through it to fund a luxury car dealership that Kingston and Braxton owned together as silent partners. My engagement wasn't love. It was business. A business transaction designed to give them legal access to everything I would inherit. There were photos of the dealership, Platinum Motors, taken from various angles. Expensive European cars lined up in a gleaming showroom. Awards on the walls. A staff of well-dressed salespeople. All of it built with my money, my future, my parents' legacy. The final folder contained something that made me physically sick. Medical records. Not mine, my grandfather's. He had pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The prognosis was 3 to 6 months. That was dated 8 months ago, which meant my grandfather was probably already dead. I called his house immediately. The number was disconnected. I called the nursing facility where I thought he was living. They had no record of him being there in the past 6 months. I drove straight to his house, the sprawling Victorian where I'd spent countless childhood afternoons baking cookies with him and listening to his stories about the old days. The house was empty. Not just unoccupied, completely stripped. No furniture, no personal belongings, nothing. A neighbor came out as I stood on the front porch, trying the locked door. "Excuse me," Mrs. Patterson called out. She'd lived next door for 30 years. "Are you looking for Theodore?" "Yes, I'm his granddaughter, Ariel." Her face softened with sympathy. "Oh honey, I'm so sorry. He passed away 4 months ago. Your stepfather said you were traveling in Europe and couldn't make it back for the service." I had never been to Europe. I'd been in Chicago the whole time, completely unaware that my grandfather was dying, then dead, then buried without my knowledge. "He asked about you at the end," Mrs. Patterson continued. "Kept saying he needed to see you, that he had something important to tell you. But your family said you were too upset to visit." I drove home in a daze, my mind reeling with the implications. They'd isolated my grandfather in his final months, preventing him from contacting me directly. They'd lied about my whereabouts to explain why I wasn't at his funeral. And they'd inherited his entire estate without me knowing he was gone. But I didn't confront anyone. Instead, I did what Uncle Tobias's note had advised. I started planning my revenge. The first thing I discovered was that I legally owned the family's lakeside estate. The house where Kingston lived year-round, where we held every holiday gathering, where I'd spent countless weekends thinking I was a welcome guest in a family property. According to my parents' original will, which Uncle Tobias had somehow obtained copies of, the property was mine. Kingston had been living there illegally for years, forging documents to claim ownership and collecting rental income from the guest cottage on the property. I hired a lawyer, a sharp woman named Victoria Steele who specialized in financial fraud and had a reputation for being absolutely ruthless in court. Her office was in a gleaming downtown tower, and when I laid out all the evidence Uncle Tobias had gathered, her eyes lit up with professional interest. "This is extraordinary," she said, flipping through the documents. "The systematic nature of the fraud, the multiple conspirators, the long-term planning. This isn't just theft, it's a sophisticated criminal enterprise." We quietly filed the paperwork to assert my ownership of the lakeside property. Within 48 hours, the deed was corrected in the county records, and I sold the property to a development company for $2.3 million. The new owners were a family who specialized in converting old estates into retreat centers for trauma survivors. They gave Kingston 30 days to vacate. He had no idea what was coming. That weekend, I played the perfect stepdaughter. I joined the family for dinner at the lake house, bringing expensive wine and flowers from the farmer's market like I always did. Kingston grilled salmon on the deck overlooking the water, telling stories about his latest business trip to Denver. Sloane complained about difficult customers at the gallery and asked detailed questions about my wedding dress fitting the week before. Braxton held my hand across the dinner table and talked enthusiastically about our honeymoon plans. He'd booked us a suite in Santorini, he said. 2 weeks of pure relaxation before we started our new life together. I smiled and nodded and asked all the right questions, watching them all with new eyes, knowing it would be one of the last times we'd sit together as a family. "You seem quiet tonight, sweetheart," Kingston said, his voice full of the fake paternal concern I now recognized as manipulation. "Everything okay? Not having second thoughts about the wedding, are you?" He laughed as he said it, but I caught the quick look he exchanged with Sloane. "Just thinking about the future," I replied, taking a sip of wine. "So many changes coming. So many surprises." He had no idea how right I was. The eviction notice arrived the following Tuesday. I was at work, sitting in a client meeting about a new campaign launch, when Kingston called. My phone buzzed insistently on the conference table until I finally excused myself to answer it. His voice was panicked and angry in a way I'd never heard before. "Ariel, there's been some kind of mistake," he said, breathing heavily. "Some development company is claiming they own the lake house. They've got sheriffs here with papers saying I have 30 days to move out. My lawyer says the deed shows you as the original owner, but that can't be right. That house has been in the family for decades." I walked to the window of the conference room, looking down at the busy street below. People hurrying to appointments, living their normal lives, unaware that mine was about to explode. "Actually, it is right," I said calmly. "I am the owner. And I sold it." The silence on the other end lasted for nearly a minute. I could hear him breathing, could almost feel his mind racing to understand what was happening. "Ariel," he said finally, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone I'd never heard him use before. "We need to talk. Now." "No, Kingston. We really don't." I hung up and immediately called Victoria. "It's time for Phase 2. Phase 2 was the forensic audit. Using Uncle Tobias's meticulously gathered evidence, we traced every stolen dollar, every forged signature, every fraudulent transfer over the past 16 years. The scope of their theft was staggering. Not only had they stolen my trust fund and my grandfather's inheritance, but they'd used my identity to secure business loans I'd never heard of. Credit cards had been opened in my name and maxed out. My stellar credit score had been leveraged to fund their schemes for years. Victoria hired a team of forensic accountants who worked around the clock to untangle the web of financial deception. They discovered shell companies, offshore accounts, and a network of fake businesses all designed to launder my stolen money. But we also found something else. Security footage that Uncle Tobias had obtained from a private investigator he'd hired. Hours of video showing Braxton with another woman, a stunning blonde named Savannah Pierce who worked as Kingston's executive assistant at his real estate firm. They'd been together for over a year, and it wasn't just an affair. They were living together in a condo that, according to the lease, was paid for by Meridian Solutions. My stolen money was funding my fiancé's relationship with another woman. In one particularly damning recording, I watched Braxton and Savannah in bed together, talking casually about our upcoming wedding while she painted her nails. "Just a few more months," he said, stroking her hair while she concentrated on applying the polish. "Once I'm legally married to her, we can start the incompetency proceedings. Her family already thinks she's emotionally unstable from losing her parents so young. It won't take much to convince a judge that she can't handle her financial affairs." Savannah looked up at him with cold calculation in her eyes. "And then what? We keep pretending forever. For a few years, maybe. Until we've transferred everything offshore and she has some kind of accident. Mental health is such a fragile thing, you know? People snap all the time. They were planning to have me declared mentally unfit, steal everything I owned, and then kill me." I paused the video and poured myself a glass of wine with shaking hands. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't shaking from fear or shock. I was shaking from rage. Pure, focused, calculating rage. Because now I had everything I needed to destroy them all. The next morning, I called my wedding planner and cancelled everything. The venue at the Art Institute, the caterer who was preparing dinner for 200 guests, the photographer who'd shot my engagement photos, the string quartet, the florist, even the priest who was supposed to marry us. I told each of them there'd been a family emergency and the wedding was postponed indefinitely. Then I visited Platinum Motors, the luxury car dealership that Kingston and Braxton owned together using my stolen inheritance. It was everything Uncle Tobias's photos had suggested and more. A gleaming showroom filled with Ferraris, Lamborghinis, and other exotic cars worth hundreds of thousands of dollars each. The staff wore expensive suits and moved with the confidence of people working at the top of their field. Awards and commendations covered the walls, proclaiming Platinum Motors as the premier luxury dealer in the Midwest. All of it built with my money. My parents' legacy. My grandfather's life's work. "Can I help you?" A young man approached me with a practiced smile. His name tag read Marcus and his suit probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. "Just looking," I said, pulling out my phone to take photos of the showroom, the cars, the business licenses displayed prominently by the entrance. "Beautiful place. The owners must be doing very well for themselves." "Oh yes, Mr. Voss and Mr. Wild are very successful businessmen. They've built this place from nothing in just 2 years." From nothing. If only he knew where that nothing had actually come from. "I might be interested in purchasing something," I said, playing the role of wealthy customer. "Could you tell me more about the financing options?" For the next hour, Marcus walked me through their operations, proudly explaining how they offered custom financing packages for high-net-worth individuals. How they had relationships with private banks that could arrange discreet loans. How they specialized in helping clients make purchases that wouldn't show up on standard credit reports. It was a money laundering operation hidden behind a legitimate business, just like Uncle Tobias had suspected. That afternoon, I met with Camden Cross, an investigative journalist who specialized in financial crimes and government corruption. I'd researched him carefully and found that he'd exposed several high-profile fraud cases, including a city council embezzlement scheme that had sent 3 politicians to prison. His office was cluttered with papers, awards, and photos from various stories he'd covered over his 15-year career. When I showed him the evidence Uncle Tobias had gathered, his eyes lit up with the intensity of a hunter spotting prey. "This is incredible," he said, flipping through the documents with increasing excitement. "A systematic family conspiracy spanning decades. Multiple victims, multiple crimes. The human interest angle alone will be huge, but the financial complexity makes it perfect for a long-form series." "When can we publish?" I asked. "Give me 2 weeks to verify everything independently and interview some sources. I want this to be bulletproof when it comes out." Those 2 weeks were the strangest of my life. I continued going to family dinners, accepting Braxton's kisses, listening to Ophelia's fake concern about my stress levels from wedding planning. I played the role of naive, trusting Ariel one last time while secretly recording every conversation on a device Victoria had given me. But I was also digging deeper into Uncle Tobias's evidence, following every lead, uncovering new layers of deception. And what I found made everything else look simple by comparison. Hidden in his most secure files, protected by multiple passwords, was security footage from the hiking trail where he'd died. The timestamp showed Kingston's distinctive black Mercedes parked at the trailhead just 2 hours before Tobias's body was discovered by other hikers. Phone records revealed a series of increasingly threatening messages Kingston had sent to my uncle in the 3 days before his death. "Stop digging or there will be consequences," read one text. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," said another. The final message, sent just 6 hours before Uncle Tobias died, was the most chilling. "Last warning. Back off or join your brother. My father." Kingston was referring to my father, who had died in that car accident when I was 12. An accident that was looking less and less accidental with each piece of evidence I uncovered. Uncle Tobias hadn't died in a hiking accident. He'd been murdered for investigating the truth about my family. I called Victoria immediately, my hands shaking as I dialed. "We need to contact the FBI," I said. "This isn't just fraud anymore. This is murder." The FBI field office in Chicago was an imposing glass and steel building downtown. Agent Sarah Chen was a small, serious woman in her 40s who listened intently as I laid out the entire conspiracy in a windowless conference room. The financial crimes, the identity theft, the systematic deception, and now the murders. She took detailed notes and asked probing questions, occasionally pausing to consult with colleagues or make phone calls to other departments. "There's something else," she said when I finished my presentation. "We've been investigating a series of inheritance frauds across 3 states over the past 5 years. Similar patterns, similar methods, always targeting wealthy families with complex estates. I think your stepfather might be connected to cases we haven't been able to solve." She showed me photos of other families, other victims. Wealthy widows who'd married charming men who later disappeared with their money. Adult children who'd lost their inheritances to trusted family friends who turned out to be professional con artists. Young people like me who'd been systematically isolated from their assets by people they trusted. The pattern was clear and chilling. Kingston wasn't just a thief. He was a professional predator who specialized in long-term cons targeting inherited wealth. "How many families?" I asked, looking at photo after photo of victims. "At least 12 that we can prove. Probably more that we haven't identified yet. The total theft is over $40 million. $40 million stolen from families like mine. $40 million worth of dreams, security, and futures destroyed by one man's greed." But the FBI investigation would take months, and I wanted justice now. So I kept playing my double game, gathering evidence while pretending nothing had changed. The breakthrough came when I searched through more of Uncle Tobias's hidden files. In a folder marked Emergency Only Nuclear Option, I found documents that shattered everything I thought I knew about my life. Medical records, DNA tests, death certificates, birth certificates. The woman I'd called my mother for 18 years wasn't my mother at all. The real Sloane McCarty had died in a car accident when I was 3 years old, just like my father. But unlike my father's death, which had been thoroughly investigated and ruled accidental, my mother's death had been covered up, her identity stolen by the woman who'd been raising me ever since. The woman who'd raised me was an imposter named Stella Grimm, Kingston's long-term partner in crime. They'd murdered my real mother and assumed her identity to gain access to my father and our family's wealth. They'd been running this con for over 20 years, and I was their biggest score. I sat on my apartment floor at 2 a.m, surrounded by papers that proved everything I'd believed about my life was a lie, crying for the mother I'd lost twice. Once when I was too young to remember, and again when I learned the truth about who'd killed her and stolen her place in my life. But there was more. So much more. The files contained evidence of other crimes, other assumed identities, other families destroyed. Kingston and Stella had been running inheritance scams for over 20 years, moving from state to state, assuming new identities, marrying into wealthy families, and then systematically stealing everything they could before disappearing to start the process over again. My father had been their biggest target yet. A successful construction company owner with significant assets and a young daughter who would inherit everything if anything happened to him. They'd spent years working their way into his life, with Stella assuming the identity of his wife's best friend after the real woman's convenient death, gaining his trust, and eventually marrying him after they'd arranged for my real mother to have her fatal accident. When my father started getting suspicious about financial irregularities in his business accounts, they'd sabotaged his construction company by providing insider information to his competitors, causing the stress and financial pressure that led to his fatal heart attack at 44. They'd killed both my parents and spent 16 years stealing everything they'd worked for. I called Agent Chen and told her what I'd found. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. "Ariel," she said finally, her voice tight with concern, "I think we need to move faster on this case. If they suspect you know the truth, you could be in real danger. These people have killed before, and they won't hesitate to kill again." But I wasn't ready to hide. I wasn't ready to run. I was ready for war. I scheduled a family dinner at my apartment, telling everyone I had exciting news about the wedding to share. "Something about the honeymoon plans," I said. Kingston, Stella, Braxton, and Ophelia all agreed to come, bringing flowers and wine like we were actually celebrating something joyful. I'd prepared carefully. Victoria had helped me install hidden cameras in every room, professional-grade recording equipment wired through my apartment's electrical system, and FBI agents were stationed in unmarked cars outside my building. I cooked an elaborate dinner, setting the table with my best china and lighting candles like it was a special occasion. Which, in a way, it was. It was the last supper for my fake family. I served dinner and made small talk, asking about their work, their plans for the weekend, normal family conversation. Kingston complimented my cooking. Stella told stories about difficult customers at the gallery. Braxton talked about a new client at his marketing firm. Ophelia showed me photos from her latest art project. All of them playing their roles perfectly, not knowing that their performance was being recorded from multiple angles. "Actually," I said as we finished the main course and I brought out dessert, "I have some papers I'd like everyone to sign before we get to the exciting news. Just some wedding-related documents, insurance forms, that sort of thing." I placed a thick folder on the table, handing each of them a separate document from inside. They took them casually, expecting routine paperwork. But these weren't wedding forms. They were confession documents, each one detailing their specific crimes in precise legal language. I watched their faces change as they read, confusion giving way to shock, then fear, then panic. Kingston opened his folder first. I watched his expression shift from casual interest to confusion to horror as he read the first page. "What is this?" "The truth," I said calmly, remaining seated while they all processed what they were seeing. "About everything. About who you really are, what you've done, and what's going to happen next." Stella's face went white as she read her document, which detailed her assumption of my mother's identity and her role in multiple murders. Her hands started shaking so badly she could barely hold the papers. Braxton stood up so quickly he knocked over his chair, his document fluttering to the floor. The sound of the chair hitting the hardwood echoed through the apartment. Ophelia just stared at her confession like she couldn't process what she was seeing, tears already starting to form in her eyes. "You little bitch," Kingston snarled, dropping his mask of paternal concern for the first time in my presence. "You have no idea what you're playing with. No idea who you're dealing with." I stood up slowly and walked to the window, where I could see the FBI vehicles waiting outside, exactly as planned. "Actually, I know exactly who I'm dealing with. I know about Meridian Solutions. I know about Platinum Motors. I know about the money you've stolen from me and 11 other families over the years." I turned back to face them, feeling calmer than I had in months. "But most importantly, I know about my real mother. I know what you did to Sloane McCarty and my father." The room erupted. Stella started crying, babbling denials mixed with confessions. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she sobbed. "It was just supposed to be about money. No one was supposed to get hurt." Braxton tried to run for the door, but I'd locked it from the inside and hidden the key. He pounded on the wood, shouting for help that wasn't coming. Ophelia just sat there, shaking and crying, repeating I'm so sorry over and over like a broken record. But Kingston surprised me. Instead of denying everything or trying to escape like the others, he started laughing. A cold, bitter sound that made my skin crawl. You think you're so smart, he said, his voice full of genuine admiration mixed with menace. You think you've figured it all out. But you have no idea how deep this goes, little girl. No idea how many people we've destroyed, how much money we've taken, how many bodies we've buried. He pulled out his phone, and for a moment I thought he might try to call for help. Instead, he started recording a video, pointing the camera at me. You want a confession? Fine. I'll give you a confession that will make your little evidence collection look like a children's game. His voice became cold, mechanical, like he was reading from a script. Yes, we killed your precious mother. Ran her car off the road on a dark night and watched it burn. Yes, we killed your father. Fed him information about business deals that were designed to ruin him, watched him work himself to death trying to save a company we'd already destroyed. He was still recording, his voice getting more excited as he continued. Yes, we stole every penny you were supposed to inherit. Yes, your whole life has been a lie designed to keep you compliant while we bled you dry. But you know what, Ariel? It was worth it. Every penny, every lie, every dead body was worth it. Stella was crying harder now, begging him to stop talking. Braxton had given up on the door and was just standing there, staring at Kingston like he'd never seen him before. Your Uncle Tobias thought he was so clever, gathering evidence against us, Kingston continued, still recording. But he made one fatal mistake. He trusted the wrong person. He looked directly at Ophelia, who was crying now so hard she could barely breathe. She told us everything he was planning. Every meeting with lawyers, every piece of evidence he'd collected, every plan he made to expose us. We knew exactly when and where to find him on that hiking trail. Ophelia's sobbing got even louder. I didn't know, she gasped between tears. I didn't know they were going to kill him. I just thought it was about money. I thought they were just going to scare him into backing off. Shut up, Kingston snapped, but it was too late. The confession floodgates had opened. Stella was admitting to assuming my mother's identity, describing in detail how they'd studied her mannerisms, her voice, her relationships so they could take her place seamlessly. Braxton was detailing the plan to have me declared incompetent after our wedding, explaining how they'd researched the legal requirements and identified the specific doctors and judges they would need to bribe. Ophelia was explaining how she'd been feeding them information for 3 years, ever since graduation, when Kingston had approached her with an offer she couldn't refuse, $50,000 to befriend me and report on my activities. And Kingston kept talking, his voice getting more manic as he described their other victims, other families they'd destroyed, other people they'd killed over their 20-year crime spree. He mentioned names, dates, locations, methods of murder. It was like he couldn't stop himself, like the opportunity to finally boast about his crimes was too tempting to resist. I sat there recording it all on my hidden devices, feeling strangely calm. After months of lies and deception, the truth was finally coming out in all its horrific detail. When they finally exhausted themselves, when the confessions turned to desperate pleas for mercy and promises to return the money, I walked to the door and unlocked it. Agent Chen and her team were waiting in the hallway, having listened to everything through the surveillance equipment. I think you'll find this interesting, I said, handing her the recording device I'd been carrying in my pocket. The arrests were swift and efficient. Kingston in handcuffs, still ranting about how smart he thought he was even as they read him his rights. Stella crying and begging for mercy, trying to bargain for a reduced sentence by offering information about other crimes. Braxton trying to negotiate even as the handcuffs went on, claiming he was just following orders and didn't know about the murders. Ophelia collapsing completely, having to be helped to the police car while she repeated I'm sorry over and over. I watched from my window as they were loaded into separate cars and driven away, finally ending their reign of terror over my life. The media attention was intense and immediate. Camden Cross's articles, published just days after the arrests, turned the case into a national sensation. The trust fund conspiracy became front-page news across the country, with follow-up articles revealing new details about other victims and other crimes. Documentary producers called daily, offering large sums for exclusive access to my story. Book publishers wanted to sign me to tell my tale. Movie studios sent representatives to discuss adaptation rights. But the trials were what really mattered. The legal process that would finally deliver justice for all the lives they'd destroyed. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Marcus Webb, was thorough and relentless. They presented evidence from multiple states, testimony from dozens of victims, and expert analysis of the financial crimes that showed the true scope of Kingston and Stella's operation. One by one, they were convicted and sentenced. Kingston received multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole for 6 counts of first-degree murder, including my parents and Uncle Tobias. The prosecution proved he'd killed at least 6 people across 3 states in his 20-year crime spree, and he was suspected in several other unsolved deaths. Stella got life without parole for her role in the murders and for identity theft on a massive scale. The evidence showed she'd assumed at least 4 different identities over the years, destroying the lives of families in Illinois, Ohio, and Michigan. Braxton received 15 years in federal prison for fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering. His cooperation with investigators helped convict the others, but it didn't save him from significant prison time. Ophelia got 5 years for conspiracy and accessory to murder. Her genuine remorse and cooperation with law enforcement earned her a lighter sentence, but she'd have to live with the guilt of Uncle Tobias's death for the rest of her life. The financial recovery took over a year, but eventually, I got back everything they'd stolen, plus damages and interest. The car dealership was sold at auction, Meridian Solutions was dissolved, and all their hidden assets were seized and returned to their rightful owners, me and the other families they'd victimized. But money couldn't give me back my parents or my uncle. It couldn't erase the years of lies or the knowledge that I'd lived my entire adult life surrounded by people who wanted me dead. It couldn't restore the innocent trust I'd once had in the people closest to me. What it could do was help other people avoid the same fate. I established the Tobias McCarty Foundation for Fraud Victims, providing legal assistance and financial support to families dealing with inheritance scams and identity theft. The foundation's lawyers worked pro bono to help victims navigate the complex legal system and recover their stolen assets. I funded a legal clinic at Northwestern University that specialized in family financial crimes, training young lawyers to recognize and prosecute the kind of sophisticated fraud that had nearly destroyed my life. I created scholarships for children who'd lost parents to violent crimes, ensuring they'd have the education and opportunities their parents would have wanted them to have. And I worked with law enforcement agencies across the country to develop better methods for identifying and stopping inheritance fraud before it could destroy more families. But even with all that work, all those ways of channeling my experience into something positive, I still had sleepless nights. Nightmares where I relived the moment I discovered the truth, where I saw Kingston's face as he confessed to murdering my parents, where I felt again the crushing realization that my entire life had been built on lies. 6 months after the trials ended, I was still struggling with trust issues. Every new person I met, every potential friendship or romantic connection, was filtered through the lens of suspicion I couldn't shake. How could I ever trust anyone again when the people closest to me had been planning to kill me? It was during one of these dark periods that I received an unexpected visitor. I was working late in the foundation office, reviewing grant applications from fraud victims seeking legal assistance, when my assistant buzzed me. "Ms. McCarty, there's a woman here to see you. She says her name is Rebecca Thorne, and she's Ophelia's sister." I hadn't seen or spoken to anyone from Ophelia's family since the arrests. Her parents had sent a brief letter of apology, expressing their shock at their daughter's actions, but we'd had no direct contact. Rebecca looked like an older version of Ophelia, but where my former best friend had always been bubbly and energetic, Rebecca was serious and composed. She sat across from my desk with the posture of someone carrying a heavy burden. "I know you probably don't want to see anyone connected to my family," she began, "but I have something that belongs to you. Something Ophelia asked me to give you before she went to prison." She placed a small wooden box on my desk, The kind used to store jewelry or other precious items. She said to tell you that she kept a diary throughout the 3 years she was spying on you. Everything she reported to Kingston, yes, but also everything she didn't report. All the times she protected you without you knowing it. All the ways she tried to minimize the damage while still keeping you safe. I stared at the box, unsure whether I wanted to open it. She also wanted you to know that she never knew about the murders. She thought it was just financial fraud, and when she realized how deep it went, she tried to back out. That's when they threatened her family. Threatened me, threatened our parents. She was trapped just like you were, in a different way. I opened the box with trembling hands. Inside was a leather journal filled with Ophelia's familiar handwriting, along with several photographs and what appeared to be audio recordings on small digital devices. The first journal entry was dated 3 years earlier, just after our college graduation. A man approached me today offering money to be friends with Ariel McCarty. It sounds crazy, but he said her stepfather wants to keep track of her activities for family security reasons. $50,000 just to stay close to her and report back occasionally. I could pay off my student loans, help mom with her medical bills. Ariel's rich anyway, what harm could it do? But as I read further, the entries became increasingly troubled. Kingston asked me to find out about Ariel's therapy sessions. He wants to know if she's discussing family finances with her therapist. This feels like a violation of her privacy, but he says it's just to protect the family assets. I'm starting to wonder what I've gotten myself into. I saw bruises on Ariel's wrist today when she was reaching for something. She said she fell, but they looked like finger marks. I asked Kingston about it, and he got angry, told me to focus on financial matters only. I'm scared for her. Kingston wants me to encourage Ariel to sign power of attorney documents, says it's for wedding planning purposes. I told him I wouldn't do it. He reminded me about the money I owe him, about the protection my family needs. I feel sick. The entries painted a picture of Ophelia being gradually manipulated and threatened, just like I had been. She'd started as a willing participant for the money, but as the scheme escalated, she tried to protect me in small ways while being too afraid to tell me the truth. There were photographs of documents she'd been asked to steal from my apartment, but instead of taking the originals, she'd photographed blank pages or outdated information. Audio recordings of phone calls with Kingston where she'd lied about my activities, telling him I was depressed and withdrawn when I was actually happy and social, making me seem like less of a threat to their timeline. The final entries, dated just weeks before the arrests, were desperate. I know about Uncle Tobias now. Kingston let something slip about taking care of problems permanently. I think they killed him. I think they've killed others. I have to tell Ariel, but they've made it clear what happens to people who betray them. If something happens to me, I hope she'll understand that I tried to protect her the only way I could. I saw the engagement ring Braxton bought with her stolen money. I saw the wedding venue they're paying for with funds that should be hers. I'm going to tell her everything after the wedding, when she's legally protected as his wife and they can't hurt her as easily. I just pray I can keep her safe until then. She'd been planning to warn me all along. She'd just been waiting for what she thought would be a safer time. Rebecca watched me read, her own eyes filling with tears. She wanted you to know that you were the best friend she ever had, Rebecca said quietly. That betraying you was the worst thing she'd ever done, even if she thought she was protecting you in her own way. I closed the journal and looked at Rebecca, feeling a complex mix of emotions I couldn't untangle. Where is she now? Minimum security facility in Indiana. She's been writing letters to other victims of inheritance fraud, trying to help them understand the warning signs she missed. It's like she's trying to make amends by helping others avoid what happened to you. I kept the box but didn't commit to anything else. Rebecca left her contact information and said that Ophelia would understand if I never wanted to see or speak to her again, but that she hoped someday I might be able to forgive her. That night, I sat in my apartment reading through the entire journal, listening to the audio recordings, trying to reconcile this version of events with my memories of feeling completely betrayed by my best friend. The truth, as usual, was more complicated than I'd initially understood. 2 weeks later, I made a decision that surprised even me. I drove to the Federal Correctional Facility in Indiana to visit Ophelia. She looked smaller than I remembered, thinner, with her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail instead of the elaborate styles she'd always favored. When she saw me walk into the visiting room, she started crying immediately. "I'm so sorry," were the first words out of her mouth. "I'm so sorry, Ariel. I know that doesn't fix anything, I know it doesn't change what I did, but I need you to know how sorry I am." We talked for 2 hours. She told me about the threats against her family, about the gradual escalation from simple financial reporting to active participation in their schemes. She explained how Kingston had manipulated her, using her family's financial struggles and her own student debt to control her actions. "I thought if I could just get through the wedding, if I could wait until you were legally protected as Braxton's wife, I could tell you everything safely," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't know they were planning to kill you after the marriage. I thought they just wanted your money. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly. I wasn't ready for that. But it was understanding. A recognition that she'd been another victim of Kingston's manipulation, caught in her own web of fear and financial desperation. "I'm testifying in the other cases," she told me before I left. "All the families they victimized before you. I'm helping prosecutors in Ohio and Michigan build their cases. It's the least I can do." As I drove home, I realized that revenge had taught me something unexpected about justice. True justice isn't just about punishment, it's about understanding the full scope of the harm that was done and finding ways to prevent it from happening again. The foundation work expanded over the following months. We developed educational programs for high schools and colleges about financial fraud, teaching young people how to recognize the warning signs of inheritance scams and identity theft. We partnered with banks and investment firms to create better safeguards for trust funds and estate planning. But the most meaningful work came from connecting with other survivors. I received a letter from a woman named Patricia Hendricks in Ohio, one of Kingston and Stella's earlier victims. She'd lost her husband's life insurance money and their family home to a scheme remarkably similar to what they'd done to me. "Reading about your case in the newspapers was the first time I understood that what happened to me wasn't random," she wrote. "It wasn't my fault for being too trusting. It was a systematic crime perpetrated by professionals who knew exactly how to exploit grief and vulnerability." Patricia and I began corresponding regularly, and eventually we met in person. She was in her 60s, a retired teacher whose husband had died of cancer 5 years earlier. Kingston had approached her at her husband's funeral, posing as a financial advisor who specialized in helping widows manage their assets. Over the course of 2 years, he'd stolen nearly everything she owned, leaving her living in a small apartment on Social Security while he disappeared to target his next victim, my family. "The worst part wasn't losing the money," Patricia told me over coffee in Chicago. "It was losing faith in my own judgment. 4 years, I blamed myself for being too naive, too willing to trust someone who seemed helpful during the worst time of my life." Through Patricia, I met other survivors from Kingston's earlier crimes. Each had a similar story of manipulation, isolation, and systematic theft. Each had struggled with self-blame and trust issues in the aftermath. Together, we formed a support network that became an official program of the Foundation. Monthly meetings for inheritance fraud survivors, led by licensed therapists who specialized in financial trauma. The sessions helped people understand that being victimized by professional criminals wasn't a reflection of their intelligence or judgment, it was simply bad luck to cross paths with skilled predators. 1 year after the trials, I stood before a congressional committee that was considering new federal legislation to combat inheritance fraud. The proposed bill would create a national database of financial predators, require stricter identity verification for estate planning, and establish federal penalties for the kind of systematic schemes that had nearly destroyed my life. The criminals who targeted my family didn't just steal money, I testified. They stole security, trust, and peace of mind from multiple generations. They destroyed families by turning us against each other through lies and manipulation. The financial damage can be calculated, but the emotional damage lasts a lifetime. The bill passed 6 months later, becoming the Tobias McCarthy Act for Inheritance Protection. It wasn't everything we'd hoped for, but it was a start. As I sat in the gallery watching the president sign the legislation, I thought about Uncle Tobias and how proud he would have been. His investigation, his courage in standing up to Kingston despite the personal risk, had ultimately led to protections for countless future families. His death had meaning beyond just saving me. It had helped save others. The second anniversary of that terrible Tuesday when my life collapsed was approaching, and I found myself reflecting on how much had changed. The foundation was thriving, with offices in 3 cities and a staff of 12 people dedicated to helping fraud victims. The legal clinic had successfully recovered millions of dollars for families targeted by inheritance scams. The support groups were helping survivors rebuild their ability to trust and connect with others. But perhaps most importantly, I had slowly begun to trust again myself. It started with small things. Friendships with colleagues who had no connection to my past. A romantic relationship with David, a fellow survivor I'd met through the foundation who'd lost his family farm to a similar scheme. We understood each other's caution, each other's need to verify and document everything, each other's hard-won wisdom about protecting what matters most. David had proposed 3 months earlier, on the anniversary of his own liberation from the criminals who'd targeted his family. It wasn't the elaborate romantic gesture Braxton had staged, which I now knew had been calculated manipulation. Instead, it was simple and honest, 2 people who'd survived betrayal choosing to build something real together. "I know we both have reasons to be careful," he'd said, holding a simple ring that he'd bought with money he'd earned himself, not stolen from anyone. "But I also know that letting fear control our lives is another way of letting them win. I want to choose trust. I want to choose us." We were planning a small wedding, just close friends and the few family members I'd reconnected with, distant relatives who'd been as shocked as I was to learn the truth about Kingston and Stella. No elaborate venues paid for with stolen money, no guest list full of people with hidden agendas. Just honest people celebrating an honest love. The Lake House property, now the Tobias McCarty Retreat Center, had become a place of healing rather than deception. Fraud survivors from across the country came there for weekend workshops, support group intensives, and simply to experience what it felt like to be in a place where truth was valued above all else. I visited often, walking the same paths where I'd played as a child, but now understanding the full context of my family's history. The memorial garden where Uncle Tobias was buried had become a place of pilgrimage for other survivors, a reminder that fighting for truth sometimes requires the ultimate sacrifice. On the second anniversary of receiving that mysterious package, I returned to Uncle Tobias's grave with flowers and a letter I'd written to him. Dear Uncle Tobias. 2 years ago, you saved my life by showing me the truth about my family. At the time, I thought you were just giving me evidence to recover my stolen money. I didn't understand that you were giving me something much more valuable, the power to choose my own future. The foundation is thriving. We've helped over 200 families recover from inheritance fraud. The legal clinic has recovered $12 million in stolen assets. The support groups are helping survivors learn to trust again, including me. But more than that, your investigation led to federal legislation that will protect future generations from the kind of systematic predators who destroyed so many lives. Kingston and Stella will never hurt another family. Braxton will never manipulate another woman. And other criminals like them will face stronger penalties and better detection thanks to the laws your courage helped create. I'm getting married next month to a good man who understands both the value of trust and the importance of verification. We're building a life based on honesty, something I never thought would be possible after everything that happened. I know you would be proud of how I chose to use my second chance at life. Not for revenge, but for justice. Not to tear down, but to build up. Not to spread the poison they tried to feed me, but to create antidotes for other people facing the same toxins. Thank you for showing me that the truth is always worth fighting for, no matter how much it costs. Thank you for proving that family isn't always about blood, sometimes it's about who's willing to sacrifice everything to protect you. I promise to keep fighting for other survivors, to keep telling this story as long as it can help people, and to live the kind of honest life you died protecting. With love and gratitude, Ariel**. As I placed the letter by his headstone, I noticed a small group of people approaching from the retreat center. They were participants in that weekend's survivor workshop, coming to pay their respects to the man whose courage had inspired the movement that was helping them heal. I watched them place their own flowers, share their own stories of betrayal and recovery, find strength in the knowledge that they weren't alone in their experiences. This was Uncle Tobias's true legacy. Not just my individual salvation, but a network of survivors helping other survivors, a community built on the understanding that truth and justice are worth fighting for, even when the cost is high. As the sun set over the lake, casting golden light across the memorial garden, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced since childhood. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you've turned your worst experience into something that helps others, that you've chosen healing over hatred, justice over revenge. The criminals who tried to destroy me had failed completely. Not only had I survived, but I'd thrived. Not only had I recovered what they stole, but I'd used it to protect others from the same fate. That evening, I returned to my apartment in Chicago and opened my laptop to write my weekly blog post for the Foundation website. Hundreds of fraud survivors read these posts, looking for guidance, support, and hope that recovery was possible. Dear fellow survivors. This week marks 2 years since I discovered that my entire family was a criminal conspiracy designed to steal my inheritance and ultimately kill me. 2 years since I learned that the people I trusted most were actually professional predators who had already destroyed 11 other families before targeting mine. I know many of you are in the early stages of your own recovery, dealing with the shock of betrayal, the complexity of legal proceedings, the challenge of rebuilding trust in a world that suddenly feels dangerous and deceptive. I want you to know that healing is possible. Justice is possible. A full life after fraud is not only possible, it's the best revenge against the people who tried to destroy you. But it's not a straight line from victim to survivor. There will be setbacks, flashbacks, moments when you question whether you can ever trust anyone again. That's normal. That's part of the process. What helped me most was understanding that recovery isn't about returning to who you were before that person is gone, and trying to resurrect them will only cause more pain. Recovery is about becoming someone new, someone stronger, someone who can help others facing the same challenges. Your experience, as painful as it was, has given you wisdom that can save other people from the same fate. Your survival story can become someone else's roadmap to freedom. The criminals who targeted you wanted to leave you broken, isolated, and afraid. Every day you choose to keep fighting, keep healing, keep connecting with others is a victory over their intended legacy. Every family you help protect through your testimony or advocacy work is proof that their crimes created something they never intended, a network of survivors committed to preventing future victims. You are not just recovering from what they did to you. You are transforming it into something they never saw coming, a force for justice that will protect others long after they're gone. Keep fighting. Keep healing. Keep sharing your story with people who need to hear it. You are stronger than they ever imagined. With solidarity and hope, Ariel McCarty, Executive Director, Tobias McCarty Foundation *. After posting the blog, I checked the Foundation's voicemail. There were 3 new messages from people who'd seen news coverage about our work and needed help with their own inheritance fraud cases. Each message was heartbreaking: elderly parents whose children had stolen their life savings, young adults who'd discovered their guardians had been embezzling from their trust funds, widows who'd been targeted by romance scammers posing as grief counselors. But each message also represented hope. People who were reaching out for help instead of suffering in silence. People who were ready to fight back instead of accepting victimization as their fate. I called each of them back personally, as I always did. By the time I finished the last conversation, it was nearly midnight, but I felt energized rather than tired. This was my life now. Not the life I'd planned, not the life my parents had envisioned for me, but a life with purpose and meaning that I'd chosen for myself from the ashes of the life they'd tried to steal. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, thank you. Thank you for witnessing what it looks like to transform betrayal into advocacy, pain into purpose, victimhood into victory. If you or someone you know has been targeted by inheritance fraud, financial abuse, or family financial manipulation, please know that help is available. You are not alone, you are not powerless, and you are not responsible for other people's criminal choices. The truth is always worth fighting for, no matter how much it costs or how long it takes. Justice is always worth pursuing, even when the system seems stacked against you. And healing is always possible, even after the deepest betrayal. Hit like if this story inspired you to value truth over comfort. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about people who fought back against the systems designed to destroy them. And share this with anyone who needs to know that survival is possible, recovery is real, and sometimes the best revenge is simply living well despite everything they tried to take from you. Remember, they thought I was weak, naive, and controllable. They were wrong. And if someone is betting against your strength right now, they're probably wrong too. The woman they chose as a victim chose to become a voice for justice instead. And that choice changed everything.